Hey everybody, I'm Renee Shoup, and I've been going here since 1978, probably 78, 79, and I met my husband here when we were just in college, and then we got married here, and we raised 2 kids, and it's been a wonderful church home. I love everybody here, and they're my family, so thank you for being such a great family. And, my husband and I work in children's ministries. And I'm only here about every 3 weeks because I'm always in there, which is great. I love that. And I'm going to read today from John 14, 1 through 3. Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also.
Thank you, Renee. Well, good morning, one and all. Look at all of you guys that finished Bloomsday. I am impressed. We are a fast congregation. Well done to you. My name is Isaac. I'm the lead pastor here at the Intersection Church. I'm glad you're here. It's a good day, a beautiful, beautiful day here in Spokane. Pastor John Ortberg, he's telling the story where one day he was visiting his friend Dallas Willard. And Dallas said to him, "How are you doing today, John?" And John said, "I'm doing well under the circumstances." And Dallas said, "What are you doing under there?" And we understand that tension of living underneath our circumstances. We don't like it being under there. Maybe we're underneath the circumstances. Maybe our health has had some scares, and so we're living under the uncertainty of some of those health scares. Maybe, I've heard quite a few of us, our bosses have said, hey, there's some job situations that may be coming up, and that's made us a little tense, because we don't know what our job situation will hold. Maybe you are living on a fixed income, and gas is $5.39 or wherever it is this morning, and you think, I can't ride a bike that far anymore. There's all these things are rising up, and we can feel the tension. The circumstances press us down, and we begin to bend under the weight of the stress and the anxiety. And Dallas tells us that we were not created to live under the circumstances. We are not created to live under the strain and stress of life. Rather, we are created to live free, joy-filled, peace-filled lives. Our shoulders rolled back, full of joy. Many of us remember the days of carefree youth where bills were not our problem. Health was not our concern. Where the food came, you didn't know, but every mealtime you knew that something was on the table. Then we grow up and think, this is much more difficult than I remembered or imagined. This is the world around us. Being a grown-up is hard work. And some of us, we know that we maybe didn't experience some of the carefree joys of childhood. We didn't have that. There's always stress and strain, and we were forced to grow up under the circumstances. For some of us, some of the last thing that we feel is freedom, carefree. We just don't feel that at all. Instead, what we feel is anxiety, stress, anxious. We feel exhausted. Again, we feel the world pressing down on us. We feel the trouble of our current life. We experience sleepless nights, panic attacks, high blood pressure, all because of the trouble of this world. We are in a series over the next couple of weeks called Untroubled. Untroubled. It comes from a critical passage in John, which Renee just read from us, where Jesus has a conversation with his friends, and he says, you can live the untroubled life. How do we do that? Well, it's interesting because that word troubled is actually good for us. a little bit of trouble, a little bit of worry is critical for our survival. Let me give you a couple of examples. Worry saves us. So for example, it's not today, but in the winter here, you go outside, you take a step and you go, oh, it's really cold out here. I should get my coat. Right? That instant worry of it's going to be cold. If I'm outside too long, I will be cold, causes us to go get a coat. Teenagers don't have that sense of worry yet. They just go and do their own thing. But those of us who've lived a few years, we know worry is actually to our benefit. Or another example of worry, you're crossing Sprague and you think, I might get hit by a car. That's a worry. I'm going to look left. I'm going to look right. Worry is critical for our survival. The problem with worry, or the good part of worry, is it helps us solve a problem. It tells our mind there's something going on you need to be aware of to make sure you solve this problem so you don't end up dead. That's what worry does. It points to a problem. What happens, though, is if we leave worry there and we begin to dwell on it, it becomes anxiety, and that's where we start to live. And that's where worry becomes problematic. Worry is necessary to help us survive, but we don't live in worry or it will lead to our death. It points to a problem to be solved, and when it does that, it does a fantastic job. But if we allow that problem to stay there, it produces anxiety in us and leads to us living the shriveled, anxiety-ridden, stress-induced, exhausted life. This forms anxiety. Anxiety begins to tell us how to live our life. And so there's a professor and a scholar named Reed Wilson. He says this about anxiety. I thought it was really interesting. He said, I have it on the screen for us. Reed Wilson writes this: anxiety is the cleverest of challengers. Why? Because anxiety studies our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our needs. It captures our natural responses to threat, it exaggerates them, and then turns them against us. It hijacks any softness in our personality traits. Anxiety feeds us false information, conveying that certain activities are more threatening than they actually are. And it creates a set of beliefs that causes us to back away to safety instead of step forward into face of threat. Your challenger is looking to exploit any vulnerability you might have within these domains. Anxiety studies our weaknesses, our vulnerabilities, our needs, and then gives us false information. We think we are stepping away towards safety, but really what's happening is it's causing us to be weak. And normally, anxiety functions in two primary ways. There's pretense, which means when you start to get anxious, you get pretentious. You ball up and go, I'm in charge, I'm going to dominate. There's this attack mode, so pretense, or protection, where you go away from the situation. So you either get big or you get small in the face of anxiety. One person said that when we use pretense and we well up and we start to dominate, he said it was like, I don't understand this because I'm not a carpenter, but he said when in walls you put in this insulation and the insulation begins to expand and fill up the wall. And what happens when we ball up and get filled with pretense, what happens is we begin to push the presence of God out of our life. Or if we start to shrink and move into protection mode, what we do is we start to be unseen and we become the person in charge of our protection rather than God and staying a part of using Him as our place of refuge. So pretension or protection is where we go. And we have this false ego that displays strength or fear, which keeps us safe. We all carry some level of anxiety. All of us are walking around with this. Some of us are swimming in anxiety. This is the world you live. You're a walking chaos anxiety machine. That we are accustomed to living in just this chaotic, constant go, 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 go. That's the world that we live in. And so when we actually on purpose slow down here, you get stressed because You want things to pick back up, because if you're picking back up, I don't have to feel stress. I can go back to doing whatever. So we slow things down here. And what happens is when we slow down, our anxiety, what's going on inside us, wells up, and we don't like it. So we want things to keep it moving. Keep it moving, Isaac. But sometimes it's important that we slow down. So you might think it's a preference that you just like to go fast. Well, yeah, you prefer not to deal with your problems. That's the preference. And some people they're walking anxiety spreaders. Everywhere they go is just stress and speed and anxiety. Not that long ago, I was having a conversation with somebody, and I noticed, as I was speaking with them, my pace of speech was quickening. I could start to feel my heart rate quickening. I could feel my breath shortening. And I thought, what is going on? Oh, I'm reacting to the presence of the person around me. They're full of anxiety, and I'm joining in that. I'm joining in their anxious presence. Do you all know that we have a presence with us every time we walk into a room? When you walk into a room, whether you know it or not, your presence is felt. I say this to you guys regularly, your presence matters. It does. So if you walk into a room, something happens to that room because of you. Think of it like back in the toddlers area, mom drops off their little child. And what happens when the mom is in the room? Toddler's great. When you leave the room, eventually Cheyenne comes and gets you, because the toddler senses that mom's not present. Well, it's the same way, just every room we walk in, we bring something to that room. And so as I'm interacting with this person, I think, oh, what's my presence? What am I carrying in? When I walk into a room with you and I'm having a conversation with you, do you start to go, whew, this guy is stressful. Get me out of a conversation with this guy. Or is there a sense of ease, comfort, relax? What is happening there? And why should we be attentive to this? The reason we should be attentive to this, because the fruit of the Spirit, so the work that Christ and the Holy Spirit does in our lives, leads to joy, peace, patience, goodness, self-control. It doesn't lead to stress, anxiety, tension. That's not what happens. So if we are people who are filled with the Spirit, and the Spirit is doing work in us, more and more we should be filled with less anxiety. When people are around us, they should feel less stressful, because the work of the Spirit is producing patience, goodness, joy, peace in our lives. So we need to pay attention to this. Some of us are far from this because we are living under the circumstances. Well, why are we under there? There's an author named Steve Cuss. He tells us about 5 false needs. So 5 things we think we need that actually, when we live in these needs, they actually produce more anxiety in our lives. These false 5 needs are perfection, control, knowing the answer, being there for others, and approval. I'll say it again. Perfection, control, knowing the answer, being there for others, and approval. If we don't have these, we start to become anxious. If I don't have your approval, I start to think, oh, what's wrong with me? If I am not there for my kids, I think, oh, why can't I be there? I should be there for my kids. I need to solve every one of their problems. And my anxiety starts to rise. Well, how do we navigate that? How do we live in this? Let me rephrase the question, because the question should actually be, how do I relax in God's presence? How do I relax in God's presence where I am not worried about all my needs and being stressed? How do I relax in God's presence? Well, Jesus tells us in this passage. He tells us, and you've probably heard this passage that Renee read for us many times. It's interesting to me we have Bible verses and chapters. I'm very grateful for Bible chapters and verses. It helps us quickly find what we're looking for. The problem is a lot of times we just read it one chapter at a time and we forget literally the sentence right before what is taking place at the start of that chapter. I hadn't really connected that what happens in 14 immediately follows a really important passage. And that is, Jesus is at the Last Supper with his disciples, and he just said to his disciples, you're going to deny me. You're all going to leave me. This is what happens. This is a conversation right before the Last Supper, where Jesus then, has this conversation. He goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane. He is betrayed. He's arrested. He's crucified. This is what's going on. So right before our passage, this is the previous sentences, John 13, 36 through 38. And pay attention to the 5 needs I mentioned earlier. Listen to how they show up here. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus answered him, where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me afterward. And Peter said to him, Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. So imagine the reaction of the disciples. They're sitting there having this dinner. They think Jesus is doing great. And he says, you guys, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. You're going to be on your own for a little while. And in fact, you guys are going to abandon me. And Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times before morning breaks. And they're going, what is going on? Imagine this. So they mention loss of relationship, betrayal, failure. The false needs of the disciples are rising to the surface. They're all being challenged here. They're being there for others, control, perfection, approval. All of this is going on. And Jesus then says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. Jesus tells us something really important about how we deal with this situation. How do we deal with our troubled situation? He says, to let not your hearts be troubled. He points to our heart. Guard your heart. Guard your heart. Our scripture is full of times where our heart is talked about, and it's usually referred to as the command center of our life. And by the command center, what the heart does is it takes all of the internal information, all of the external information, and it helps us make decisions. It helps us organize what's going on, and then helps us lead as a whole person in our lives. Sometimes it's called the spirit. So what's your spirit like or heart? It's that kind of similar idea. And Jesus says, let not your heart, let not that command center be troubled. We're told in Proverbs to guard our hearts. Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So our responsibility is to protect, manage, keep an eye on our control center of our life. Make sure it's doing well. For everything flows from it, meaning if you have a healthy heart, then the fruit of your life will look like good and beautiful and wonderful things. If you have an unhealthy heart, that's where evil begins to flow. All manner of evil flows from that if our heart's not guarded. Proverbs 25:28 says this, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. So if we aren't protecting our heart, chaos begins to reign. Anxiety, stress, fear, lust, greed, pride, all of that begins to take place because we haven't guarded the command center of our lives. So the problem is, though, many of us in this room have no idea what's going on in our heart. We're just going. We have no idea that we are spreading anxiety everywhere we go, that we are full of anxiety. We sense it, but, that's just life. That's just life in the Spokane Valley today. We just think that's normal. We are completely unaware that we have an unguarded heart. We haven't taken into account what's happening within us. Our Western tendency, our American Western tendency, is to fill our minds with more information, more podcasts, more books, more Bible studies, more lectures, more information. And then we're happy because we keep what's in our mind distant from what's in our heart. We feel like, I have all these answers, and we feel satisfied with that. I recently heard about a student who attended Harvard 30 plus years ago, and she wrote a letter to her professor. This professor then published an article about it, and her professor was a professor of ethics. Now, this student was a scholarship student at Harvard, meaning she was poor. She had to work her way to get through college. In order for her to work through college, one of the ways that she did that was that she cleaned the rooms of her fellow students who didn't have to work through college. Their families had the financial means to just let them go and enjoy university. And so what she experienced, though, was really interesting. A lot of these people treated her horribly, simply because she had to work to go to school. One of them in particular was particularly problematic, and this young man, propositioned her very inappropriately numerous times, of abusive situation, and here's the problem, her and this student attended this professor's ethics class together. Now, both of these students are 4.0 students. They're both in this ethics class, and she writes a letter to the ethics professor saying, listen, what is the point of an ethics class if we can know the right information, but it doesn't impact our life? What's the point? And unfortunately for us in our Christian society, many of us have enough Bible knowledge, but we haven't pushed it down to our heart because it's uncomfortable. We don't actually want it to impact our life. We just keep taking on more stuff, more information, more podcasts. And when we do that, we've completely missed the point of the gospel. The news of Jesus is not so that we have more information, but so that it actually gets into our command center of our life and then begins to pour out into the lives around us, into our actually daily life. We're missing that because we haven't examined our heart. Let me give you one more example. It's a little different. But so what happens is we are walking around unwell. There was in the late 1840s, there was a medical field where I think there's some connection to the way we live life here. There was a maternity ward in Vienna, the Vienna General Hospital in Hungary, and it had a higher death rate for the patients at time of childbirth than any other ward in that area. In fact, 20% of patients who had a baby in this hospital, 20% died. And this became known as childbed fever. Now, much research was done why this division in this area was so problematic and significantly higher death rates than other places. And so one of the doctors there, Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, noted that his was the only division in the area that also worked on cadavers. So what was happening is the doctors are down in the morgue working on cadavers. They get a call that there's somebody that needs to have a baby. They go up to the maternity ward and they deliver the baby. And what these doctors were doing, they were bringing their toxins into the delivery room. And Dr. Semmelweis said, let's just start washing our hands when you leave the morgue. And the death rate plummeted. It went from 18.3% to 1.3%. What was going on was the doctors were carrying toxins with them, and they didn't know it. They were harming patients and bringing about death, and they were unaware. Similarly, some of us in this room were carrying toxins, and we are unaware. We don't know it because we haven't taken the time to examine ourselves, look at our heart, and say, God, how am I doing? We're walking around, we're damaging people, we're hurting people, and we're just spreading toxins. So what does David tells us in Psalm 139, 23 through 24? Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11, 28, let a person examine himself, and so eat of the bread and drink of the cup. We're invited to examine our hearts, to see what's going on inside of me. There's a 20th century Quaker missionary named Thomas Kelly, and he says the problem well. He says, we Western people are apt to think that the great problems are external and environmental. They're somebody else's problem. He says, we are not skilled in the inner life where the real roots of the problem lies. It couldn't possibly be me. It has to be the other person. We don't like to take it and examine our own selves. We've neglected regular spiritual, emotional checkups. We don't take time to reflect on how we're doing. In fact, we don't even have time to be aware that we are unaware. We don't have time even to be aware that we are unaware. Our hearts are troubled and we don't even know it. We don't realize the extent of it. We're a group of people walking around spreading toxins all over the place, exposing our own chaotic, anxiety-ridden, troubled life everywhere we go. And the way to stop that is to guard our heart. Is to say, whoa, what's going on? Examine what's going on in me. Say, God, what is going on in me? So I'm going to ask you to think through a bunch of questions this week. One of those is to just, throughout the day, pause and say, Lord, how am I doing? How am I doing? Do I have anything in my life out of order? Do I have anger, bitterness, anxiety? Is there anything inside of me that you need to bring to my attention? And then we wait. And if something comes up, then you can offer and say, Lord, I bring this to you. I bring this to you. Several times a day, pause and ask God, Lord, how am I doing? At night, before you fall asleep, you say, Lord, how am I doing? What happened today? How was my heart today? You ask God to reveal where your heart was not right. That word troubled, though, I mentioned earlier, it's a little interesting because Jesus said, let not your hearts be troubled. But in the passages leading up to this, we're actually told a couple times that Jesus was troubled. So is this a situation where Jesus says, listen, do what I say, not what I do? Now, let me give you a couple of examples here. John 13:21 says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. So he has a worry. There's something going on where Jesus is attentive to what's happening in his life. One more, John 12:27 says, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, but for this purpose I have come to this hour. So Jesus, he experienced some trouble, but what he says in this is, it's hard because of the Greek to English translation. What he's saying is, do not let your heart be too troubled. Don't be continually troubled, always troubled, constantly troubled. Don't be too troubled. And what happens when Jesus is troubled? We have some things we can learn. What did Jesus do when he experienced trouble and he says, whoa, I'm noticing in my heart that something's going astray? What does Jesus do? Well, he goes directly to God. When Jesus is troubled about his upcoming arrest and crucifixion, Jesus went and found a place of prayer. And he spent time with his Father. We're told in Luke 22:41, right after we're told that Jesus was troubled, he said, and he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Notice this. Jesus examined his heart, recognizes there was some trouble, goes to pray, and then when he does, he submits it to God and says, God, this is what I'd like to see happen. However, not my will, your will be done. Your will be done. Jesus doesn't go into pretense of, I'm also God, I'm going to save the world by dominating and taking control. He doesn't do that. He doesn't shrink down and say, I'm leaving, I'm going to run away like the disciples did. Jesus, with peace in his heart, walked to the cross. He said, your will be done. He allowed God to determine the outcome of the situation. He allowed God to determine the outcome of the situation. He surrendered control. He remained faithful and obedient to what God told him to do. Jesus' responsibility was to walk to the cross. That's what God asked him to do, go to the cross. And Jesus said, I'd rather not, but I will, because you say to. Jesus' responsibility was to allow God to take care of whatever needed to be done. Now, I mentioned the 5 false needs. If we have the 5 false needs here again: perfection, control, knowing the answer, being there for others, approval. Jesus, in the process as he's going through this, he is reminded, control. You know, God is in control. Jesus trusted his Father enough to allow God to take care of the circumstance. It was in God's hand. It looked like the enemy was going to win. A crucifixion looked like a win for our enemy. But God was in control, and Jesus trusted that. Knowing the answer, God is all-knowing. He knows the beginning and the end. Jesus knows this, and he trusts God. he doesn't have to have all the answers in that moment. He's trusting Jesus. He's trusting God his Father. What about being there for others? Jesus knows he was just abandoned by his friends, but his Father is always there. God is always present. And that Jesus, he knew he was going to be separated from his disciples, but he also knew that God was going to send his Spirit to be with his disciples. Approval. Jesus knew that he had the approval of his Father, and that was good enough for him. He was getting attacked. Crowds were chanting, "Crucify him." He was abandoned, and yet he knew his Father loved him. So these 5 false needs, Jesus knew that God was in control of it. He knew the answer. God's always there. He had God's approval. So when he was troubled, Jesus entrusted his life. And by entrust, I use that word on purpose. It means to believe, to give your life, to walk in step, to be active in that. Jesus says, you believe in God, believe also in me. I'm walking out what I'm telling you. This is what it means to believe in God, is to offer to Jesus, go to God and do what he says and be obedient. And not be in control of the circumstances. That's a hard one. We like to be in control of the circumstances. I was recently talking to a newly retired member of the military. This person had worked in the military for 20 plus years. They were in middle management. They had people under them, numerous people under their authority. They too were under authority. And we're talking about that, what that was like. And in the military, you have clear expectations. You do these steps, and success or failure of a mission is very clear. You know if you were successful or not. And I said, well, what happens if you're not successful? Well, you go back and you didn't do your job right. You should have saw all of the other problems, come up with other contingencies. If you failed, it's your fault. And I said, well, okay, now he's going into a life of ministry. What's that like to go from the military where you know immediately success or failure, and now you go and you pray to God? And he said, whew, very different. Completely opposite, because with God, you prepare and you go, here you go, God, it's your problem. It's up to you. Success or failure, it's up to you. And oftentimes, what makes it so complicated is sometimes what looks like failure is actually success. It looks like you're being turned down, but really God is saving you from something. It looks like crucifixion, but really it gives life. With God, it is so difficult. You think you've just failed, and God said, you're welcome. That's what's so complicated about this. And so we obey, and we allow God to take care of the results. We don't like that. We'd rather be in control. We'd rather have approval. But that's not the point. The point is allowing God to be in control, allowing God to have our approval, and for us to have God's approval. We never know what God is doing down the road, preparing hearts and minds. When we have a service like this, we like to know, was it good or not? Did it work or did it not? We don't know what's happening 5 months, 6 months, 10 years down the road where God will bring back certain things. We just don't know. Our responsibility is to examine our heart and then go to God and be obedient to God, which gets us to number 3. Jesus was obedient. We give God our life, showing him that he is the Lord of our life. In our anxiety, when we start to have worry, we go, whoa, God, I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to do whatever you ask. We release it to God. God, I trust you with this bill. I'm feeling anxiety, but I trust you. I'm going to be obedient to what you tell me to do. God, I need wisdom. I'm feeling anxious about the situation. I will be obedient to you, and we allow him to take care of the results. The problem is, I can do that, and then 15 minutes later, I'm stressing out again. Anybody else? So the issue then is, I'm starting to feel anxious. I'm starting to take control again. And if it's 15 minutes later, that's okay. Say, God, I release that to you. You're in control. I trust you. I'm going to be obedient. 15 minutes later, I'm having the same conversation. That is totally normal. And our job is just to keep releasing that back to God. And soon, we will begin to feel the peace that surpasses all understanding. We keep reminding ourselves, our job is to relax into Jesus. Relax. Isn't that helpful when somebody says, just relax? Well, that's what I'm offering today, is just relax into Jesus. Our tendency, what happens sometimes though, is our tendency is to avoid or to attack pretense or protection. I want to offer peace. When we are obedient, we say, your will be done. And then we walk through any circumstance that God has asked us to do. Jesus did it to the point of death, even death on the cross. We entrust God whether we want to or not. We trust him and we obey. Maybe some of you have been kept up at night with your health. You cannot solve the problem at 2 o'clock in the morning. So our invitation is to just turn it over to Jesus. And 7 minutes later, do it again and again. And we just keep returning to Jesus and remind ourselves that he is in control. Maybe some of you are worried about choices of your child. You can't change them. I've tried. My mother and father have been trying for years. They can't change their children. We try. How do we do that if we have children who are just not listening? Here you go, God. I'm going to just trust you. What happens too often, though, is we push away the difficulty. And I was noticing that there's a pendulum. So you push a problem away, and do you know that problem comes back faster and harder at you? Have you experienced that? I'm not going to deal with that. And it comes crashing back into your face. That's what happens. And so what we do is we step into obedience. We go with Jesus. We trust him. Jesus tells us to believe and obey. And some of us have been anxious about things beyond our control. And your invitation is to examine your heart, see how you're doing, and then release those to God. You are not perfect. You do not need to be understood. You do not need to know the outcome of what a situation will be. Some of you need to be told that. It's not up to you. Our job is just to obey and trust. Others of you, you've been anxious because you need to take a step and you don't want to. You kind of know what you should do, but you're looking for it to be just right. You're looking for just the right solution. And God says, I don't care. Just pick. You know, it reminds me of a restaurant. You go to a restaurant, maybe Anthony's a really nice restaurant, and you get fish or steak. And you go, oh, I don't know what to eat. It doesn't matter. Just pick one. God is saying, I don't care. If my children are in their mid-20s and they're still saying, Daddy, what should I eat for dinner? Taquitos, chicken nuggets, soup. So listen, you haven't grown up. Make your own decision. God sometimes says, I don't care. Both are great options. You get to choose. That is part of the maturation process. Sometimes there's no right or wrong answer. There's just pick. So some of you have been so worried, so anxious. God says this morning, I'm going to be with you either way. Just pick. Go ahead. He allows us that freedom in our maturation process. Others of you, you know what to do, but you just don't want to. You're scared. You just avoid. And Jesus says, trust and obey. There is no other way. Trust and obey. Step into that. So multiple questions this morning. I said earlier, Lord, how am I doing? But part of this process is as we're sensing anxiety and stress and we're sensing trouble, a troubled heart, 3 things we can ask ourselves. Number 1, what is mine to carry? What's my responsibility here? My responsibility is to make a phone call. My responsibility is to check on a situation. My responsibility is to just let it go. What's mine to carry? Number 2, what's God's to carry? Some of us are acting like we are God and control every single situation along the way. And God says, would you stop taking my job? What is God's to carry? Allow God to be God. What's God's to carry? The other question is, what is the other person's to carry? Some of us are taking on everybody else's burdens. I can't do that. We have to allow them to carry their own burdens. So what is mine to carry? What is God's to carry? What is the other person's to carry? When we're feeling troubled, ask ourselves that, and then we can go back to trusting and obeying. All right, so how do we practice this week? How do we practice not being too troubled? So when trouble comes, how do we go, whoa, how do I get this into problem-solving mode? Well, at some point this week, your invitation is just to sit down and say, Lord, how am I doing? How is my heart today? How am I doing? That's our practice. Is, Lord, how am I doing? And then sit and allow God to speak to you. Some of us have some anxiety and trouble, and it's weighing us down. And you can be reminded that you do not have to go through that alone. God is there to make your burdens light. He's there to take on the sin and shame of our world. He loves you. He knows you. Your situation is under control. And if you need to be reminded of that this morning, we're happy to pray with you. I'll pray with you in just a moment. We also have our prayer teams in the back. We're happy to pray with you. But boy, some of us, we're either using pretense and power to be awesome and it's exhausting, or we're scared and we're hurt and we're bearing under the pressure of under our circumstances. And Jesus says, don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God and trust in God. Live as if God is actually God. Let's pray. Lord, our world is full of anxiety, stress, exhaustion. We are a troubled people. But Lord, you've called us to live differently. And God, I know there are people in this room or listening online who are experiencing trouble, full of anxiety. And Lord, I ask that you would come and comfort them. May they turn their life over to you. Jesus, point out areas that they can turn over to you and surrender to you as you come and relieve the heaviness of the world around them. Lord, show us your mercy. Show us your glory in this process. We need you. For those who need you today, show yourself real. We trust you in your name. Amen. A couple of discussion questions. Two easy questions. You can talk about it in your groups. Number one, on a scale of 1 to 10, how troubled has my day been? When you're in your groups, how troubled has your day? 1 being no trouble at all. I've got the best life in the world. Versus 10, which is I got massive problems. How troubled has your day been? And number 2, how peaceful has my heart been? In the midst of chaos or calmness, pay attention to how those are impacted and what impact those two questions have related to one another. How troubled has my day been? How peaceful has my heart been? Write those on a scale of 1 to 10 this week. Let me give us a prayer of blessing as we go. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Intersection, you are loved. Go in peace.